Who should be in charge of the church? Is there any human being that should have authority in the church, authority in my life, and how do they get it, and all of that stuff? That's the question that is before us when we try to know how to operate as Christians, as well as it's a reason why it's important to know church history, because church history will give us a context to make sure that we're actually getting it right, what it is that Jesus expects of us in the functioning operation of the body of Christ. This video and exploring that question is a part of a larger video series on our channel, Bethel Pittsburgh. You go to the playlist and you'll see a playlist titled The Disciple. In there, I have the videos categorized in specific categories. One of those categories is church history, so you should see in the playlist each video will be called The Disciple. In this instance, The Disciple, church history, and the part of church history that we're exploring here. And the other videos that came ahead of it will be right above it. So if you want to check out those church history videos and work your way to this one, that would be great. But in here we're exploring the system. How do we get a system where we have pastors and we have elders and deacons and we have priests and we have popes and we have superintendents and we have presbyters and all of that stuff? How did we get into that system, and how am I supposed to interact with it, and all of those things? So when we're exploring church history, now if you were to look at the videos, we're still very much in the early church history stage of this exploration. We're in the biblical times still, so we're still able to reference things that were taking place in the Bible to see why we're in this situation. Because some might try to say, and this is happening in our culture today, some might try to say that I don't need to be a part of a church. That's not a part of this Christian faith journey. And I certainly don't need to submit myself to any kind of leadership. That's not a part of this faith journey. And what I'd like to show you as we explore church history is how untrue that is. This whole system has been a part of the faith going way back to even the time of Abraham, actually, because if you remember, and you can see that in our previous videos, the Christian faith did not start with Christ, because the Christian faith was birthed out of the fulfillment of the promise of the coming Messiah, which has its roots in the Jewish faith all the way back to Adam and Eve at the very beginning for all of humanity, when God made the messianic promise that the Messiah was going to come. So the Christian faith came out of this Jewish, it's not a different faith, it was a completer, more fuller, more revealed version of the faith, because it's been from Genesis, from the beginnings till now, especially from Genesis to the New Testament church, it was progressively being revealed what this faith is. And the Jewish faith was an incomplete version of it. The Christian faith became a more fuller, complete version of it. But we can look back to the Jewish faith to see where did things come from, and how far back were these practices. And you think about the system of priests in the Old Testament. They had priests, and the priests had varying authorities, spiritual, religious authority within the community. And there was a high priest even, so there's different levels of authority within the priesthood. And this priesthood, you could say, began back with Moses, because Moses, God led Moses to Aaron, his brother, was the first priest, and they set up a priest and a line of Levites and temple servants and all those kind of things got situated at that time back at Moses. But even if you think back to Hebrews refers to this, actually, drawing a New Testament connection, and you go back to Genesis where you see Abraham came across a priest called Melchizedek, who was an embodiment of Christ, who later the Bible would refer to Jesus as our high priest. So there's a lot of linking going on in these concepts, but my point is, going all the way back to Abraham, but at least back to Moses, the practice of the Christian faith and its roots in the Jewish faith was to have a system of priests, to have a leadership structure. When you get to Jesus' day, Jesus appoints 12 apostles, and you see this play out in the Gospels and then in the book of Acts that these apostles were to carry some kind of authority in the lives of believers. Jesus was creating an authoritative structure. We see it in the way pastors and overseers and elders and deacons are described, and their authority and what they're supposed to do and how we're supposed to interact with them demonstrates that there is some kind of authority given to human beings, spiritual authority, that we are called as believers to respond positively to. Now, some people like to start to debate about terminology and who has the authority and things like that, and those are things to be explored later. For right now, I just want us to see and accept the reality that the Bible did, the early church did, take an approach to our faith that involved a leadership structure. So we see that with those positions. We see an authority structure in that the Apostle Paul yielded to the other apostles, but then at the same time, he did not yield to them. You can reference various parts of Galatians to see that kind of dynamic. So there is some kind of authority. You see this in 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 10, maybe even Romans 14, that there's some type of dynamic where, maybe even 1 Corinthians 12, where there are people that have authority in our lives, but they don't have absolute authority. And so there's a tension there. And a lot of times people tend to just go to one side or the other and not embrace the full picture. That there are people that are supposed to have authority, including spiritual authority in my lives, that I should yield to. And there are ways in which I should not yield to that. So that sits there in the Bible as far as the way the church was developing. Paul had authority over some churches that he was no longer at. He would start and plant churches. He was a missionary, get things going, appoint elders, and then these elders oftentimes were reported back to him, or he was expecting them to submit to him in different ways. And you can also tell that just because of his writing of his letters. A lot of times the epistles that he wrote were authoritative letters to churches that he was not even present at. He was saying that this is what you guys need to be doing. And so there is this authority that exists. Again, to pay no attention yet to the who has it and what position and what are the titles and all of that stuff, but I just want us to get to see that there is an authority structure that God intended, and it does exist. Now, some cases, Paul did yield to the elders instead. We see that happen in the book of Acts. We see a teaching throughout the epistles of submission to leaders, and yet at the same time to be submitting to one another. So again, there's this balancing act thing that takes place. The Jerusalem Council had some authority in Acts 15 to issue some kind of edict over the other churches. And then this speaks to the need of having an authority structure. Again, all of it from the beginning. So when we look at church history, and you see this existing throughout the whole history of the church all the way up to the present day, even though there are often arguments on who has the authority, what titles they're supposed to have, how much authority over what, and how we're supposed to respond to it, has been an ongoing debate throughout church history. One thing that we have to accept as a reality is it was God's intention from the very beginning for there to be human authority figures within the church that are supposed to exercise authority, and we are supposed to submit to those authorities. If you have any questions on that, just leave them in the comments below. I'd be glad to answer them. Or if you're a part of Bethel, just contact me. Or if you live in the Pittsburgh area and you would like to join us in person to continue your faith journey, we would love for you to join us at Bethel Assembly of God, 2501 Staten Street, Wednesdays at 6:30 and Sundays at 10 a.m. God bless.